Now, Michael Verney is with us. We're going to talk the Hurling All-Stars in a minute, but Davy Burke has been named the Roscommon football manager. You were saying on Twitter it's a good appointment.
Yeah, Davy's very shrewd manager, shrewd coach. He had 2 very good years with Wicklow. That was after leading your native Kildare, obviously, to that under-20 title in 2018.
Yeah.
Won a county title with Sarsfields a year later. He was with Sarsfields earlier on this year and probably disappointed maybe with how they fared. But yeah, I don't know, he was at a coaching clinic recently. Really innovative coach, thinks deeply about football, watches an incredible amount of football. And I think it's Roscommon were kind of teetering on the edge, I would say, of where they were going to go. And as regards the options that they had, to me, he was the best option. It's funny, Frank Roach did a piece in our paper today, and he probably was leaning towards Brendan Hackett taking the job, as in older managers are in vogue now again.
Yeah.
10 years ago it was young managers, it was early 30s, but Davies now, like, he was the youngest manager, inter-county manager when he took on Wicklow in 2020. He's still the youngest inter-county manager now, but
could be the youngest manager for the next 20 years.
Well, he could be. Well, like, it's interesting, like Conor O'Rourke is retiring, Kevin McStay is retired, Jack O'Connor's retired. I think Jack O'Connor was the oldest All-Ireland senior football winning manager ever last year.
Right.
And a lot of the managers will tell you now they need to be retired, they need time. Liam Kearns is the same with Offaly, retired from the Guards. You need an awful lot of time. And I know Davey talked before about the sacrifices on his own health of being involved in inter-county management, but like, I remember chatting about that, and he's going through all the negatives. But if anyone's listening, I love it. You know what I mean? And that's it. And he does love it. And he'll. Roscommon's not a million miles from him, where he's based. I think he was forced to finish football at quite a young age due to a lot of injuries, and just was thrown straight into coaching. And he's taken to it like a duck to water.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting for Kildare supporters to watch how successful he is. Thinking, maybe he should have got the job. But
well, it's a funny one because Roscommon are Division 1, Kildare Division 2, so he's taken a step up, technically.
It's a good job, yeah. No, and no one in Kildare is looking down on Roscommon football going, we can't at this stage. But the Dream Team scenario came in, and that was too irresistible to the county board, and I can totally understand why as well. So
Mark McHugh's an interesting appointment alongside him. My wonder is, make it like 12 weeks to appoint a new manager. Like, Monaghan took a long time, Donegal took a long time, but is that what it is? Just the time taken in terms of commitment levels is such that it's going to take 2 or 3 months for some counties to get managers nowadays?
Well, it's not as appealing maybe as it would have been before. I think people are, even though it's a shorter season, which should help, and maybe you think that's one of the reasons why maybe Jack McCaffrey and Paul Mannion are potentially back with Dublin now, but it's a huge commitment, particularly for a younger man, and you have to be at a younger man or woman, you have to be at a certain stage in your life. I'd say, like, you're not going to be expecting kids, I'd say, to be an inter-county manager now. You just don't have time. You probably need your kids to be at a certain age as well, and it's just a difficult one. Like, Donegal were the guts of 120 days, I think, looking forward. Roscommon were 12 weeks. I just think it's been gas, and I kind of said it at the time. All the stellar tickets that were in the mix for Mayo, so only one ticket was going to get it of the 4. But if you look at where the rest of the candidates have gone, there's about 7 or 8 involved in inter-county management, be it coaching or otherwise. So sometimes you're waiting to see what happens if you're in inverted commas Leicester County maybe, or not outside of the very, very top tier. You're waiting to see what happens in some other counties and see where some of the big hitters go, and then maybe take the fall, shall we say.
Yeah, and the other thing is that everybody was like, this has to be, you've got to appoint him now, there's club championship matches you're missing. It's like, well, okay, that's this season, but this is hopefully going to be a 2/3 year appointment. Ideally it's at least 3 years before somebody, so this 3 or 4 weeks that we're taking to get the decision right, in the long run it's the right thing to get the right person, as opposed to rushing in, this guy's available right now, we need to get him.
Well, that's what happens in the GA, to be honest with you, because I've seen it with club managers, particularly guys that do the merry-go-round. Just say Burr, for example, are looking for a manager, shall we say, hypothetically. You'll hear all sorts of rumours about who's available and who's not, and you'll hear that a guy that might be in the mix, or a rival club, you'll hear all of a sudden a rumour that they're after him, and then the call is made and it's like, okay, we have him, we're sorted, and then maybe 6 months later you're thinking, maybe we should have waited, maybe we should have just went through the process of waiting it out a bit more. But that's what happens. But I think Roscommon have gotten a very good guy in Davy Burke, very forward thinking coach, and a guy who digest a crazy amount of football every weekend.
He's involved with Maynooth's Sigerson team as well, which I kind of felt like the link between Kildare and Maynooth needs to be very solidified. It's like a big opportunity for them to use this as a breeding ground, but anyway, it's another day's work. So the Hurling All-Stars, the Football All-Stars was very, very straightforward. Tommy had 14 out of 15 correct. Is the Hurling All-Stars as clear cut?
It's clear cut enough, I'd say, Jerry. Yeah, like Limerick are going to dominate. There's no point in saying any different. But there's probably a couple of positions set up for grabs. Say one half-back position that would be somewhat up in the air. Maybe one midfield position. I'd say thereafter, I'd be confident enough you'd have 13 or 14 of them, and maybe one might fluctuate. The big one for me, Jerry, is, I'll go down through my team in a minute, but the big one for me is the cornerback position, and particularly that number 2 shirt. So this is an interesting one. Sean Finn will be going for 5 All-Stars in a row, and Sean Finn is the best cornerback in the country, okay? But Sean Finn, and I love Sean Finn as a player, but Sean Finn was not the best cornerback in the country this year. So the All-Stars are picked on this year, with due credit to the players this year.
They're supposed to be, yeah.
Yeah. So Mikey Butler was the best man-marking cornerback in the game this year.
You're given the give me 1 minute to get to that, because I want to just go through this here, right? So the goalkeeper nominees are Éanna Murphy Galway, Owen Murphy of Kilkenny, and Nicky Quaid of Limerick, and you've gone for Nicky Quaid.
Yeah, no, I have gone for Nicky. Yeah, he probably doesn't get tested maybe as much as the 2 other keepers there, probably particularly Owen Murphy. But that's just the nature of the defence he has around him, and goalkeeping is not about shot stopping anymore. That's a big part of it, but his distribution is so much better than any of the other keepers there. He puts balls in positions that are so advantageous to his forwards, and he's the building block. Everything starts with him. So Nicky Quaid for me there.
He's pretty humble as well. I remember talking to him at various stages after All-Ireland finals, and he's like, last couple of minutes you're just lorrying it down on top of that half forward. Like,
that is certainly
easy.
not the case. That's like, definitely not the case. They don't lorry ball down. Yeah, it's so methodical what he does, and he's the quarterback that starts every attack basically.
You do feel like if for whatever reason it looks like he's lowering it down, it's because Grod Hegarty has his hand up and it's going straight to his hand. Yeah. Grod doesn't even have to jump, and it's like, well,
that's a big help as well. There's no point in saying any different. It's a big help having Hegarty, Hayes and Tom Morrissey there. But a lot of the time there's runs been made to make space for him to put it into. His job is to put it into those areas. And do you know what it is as well? It's the timing of it. It's one thing putting it there, but it's putting it there in the player's stride, so he doesn't even have to stop. And he does that so good.
Okay, so I think you've given away who is your number 2. You're gone for Mikey Butler.
Yeah, Mikey Butler to me was the best man-marking, probably defender in this year's championship. It's amazing to think he was coming back from a cruciate and a broken kneecap. This is his first inter-county season. He's only about 5'7", 5'8" max. You know that great picture of him doing the water in 2014 for Kilkenny. He was water boy, and he's pint size, and Richie Hogan is beside him, and then Lee Chin is beside him. It's like little, bigger, very big, and he's made. He probably wouldn't have been well touted as a potential senior star, but he was brilliant this year. He's man of the match in the Leinster final, where he followed Cathal Mannion a lot of the time. He kept Tony Kelly anonymous in the All-Ireland semi-final, and he had a good final as well.
It kind of changes how you think about Kilkenny into the future, having somebody like Mikey Butler come on the scene, where it's like Kilkenny don't really, so they've had good underage talent coming through, but not that type of defender who you can rely on, who might be a shutdown corner. Yeah,
like Brian Cody trusted him at marking the opposition's best forward in his debut season, and he was absolutely brilliant. Funny enough, he did the matchups for the All-Ireland final, maybe wouldn't have suited him. Maybe someone like Galan, who's very good in the air, so he was just picking up Graham Mulcahy, and I would say he won that duel, but maybe he wasn't allowed to have the same influence as he'd had in some other games. So to me he's the all-star cornerback. Yeah,
it's close between him and Sean Finn.
Oh yeah, it is close. Yeah, I'm just really interested to see whether Legacy gets Finn over the line, and I think Finn is the best cornerback in the country, but he wasn't the best cornerback in the country this year, if you get me.
You've gone for Hugh Lawler at fullback. What was the competition here like?
Stiff enough, yeah. Probably Mike Casey from Limerick would have been very close. Dottie Burke from Cork as well. Hugh Lawler came back from, I think he had a broken thumb in the middle of the championship, and he came back and he had a bit of trouble with Conor Whelan maybe in the first 20 minutes of the Leinster final, but was brilliant thereafter. He's your prototype modern day fullback. He's about 6'4". He's fast, he's good in the air, he doesn't have a fixation with hurling a load of ball. You know, full back is a stopper, essentially number one. He minds the house really, really well, and he probably got the better of Aaron Gillan, the All-Ireland final. Had he not, Gillan would probably been in the running for Hurler of the Year. So I think it should be 2 All Auckland Gales clubmen side by side, 2 and 3.
That's pretty impressive. You've gone for Barry Nash at 4.
Yeah, sure. He's probably changed what a modern day cornerback is now. He's like a floating cornerback. He's as much of an attacker as he is as he is a defender. Bombing down. When you see him raiding through, you know you're in serious trouble. I don't know if there's ever been a better distributor of a ball as you know, in that full back line. Traditionally, he's just humped long, and he does anything but that. And again, it's been a long time. Before Finn last year, it had been a long time before a cornerback had been in the Hurler Deer conversation, and he's firmly in it this year.
You're in the cornerback fraternity. Mike and us, you're obviously going to put that argument forward. Like, how is that position? Like, when you think of former All-Stars in that position, like the likes of Ollie Canning or Tommy Welch probably was picked at All-Star a couple of years there as well. Like, how has it changed? Are there different attributes for a cornerback now than there was even 10, 15 years ago?
I think the principle of being able to stop your man first and foremost is still, it's just about the main duty, I'd say. But like, gone are the days where you're striking ball over the shoulder and just lorrying it down the field. You have to be able to look up, you have to be able to break a tackle, and he's as potent of a weapon, a cornerback, coming forward and starting an attack as any player out the field is. And that's, like, I think it's 30 years since Brian Corcoran got Hurler of the Year as a cornerback at 19, and the game has probably changed an awful lot since then, and it just shows you how good he was this year for a cornerback to be in that Hurler of the Year conversation. He was outstanding from start to finish.
So there's no competition for him for Barry Nash?
I don't think so, no. Okay. Because generally now, the way hurling is played, there's 2 in the full back line now and 2 in the full forward line. So he kind of comes out. I think it's perfectly set up. Like, I put it this way, when you pick an All-Star team, you like it to be realistic as well. Like, what would happen here is Mikey Butler and Hugh Lawler would be the 2 men inside, and Barry Nash would be the floating one. So it picks itself perfectly.
Well, we were talking about this with Tommy when we were talking about the football yesterday, is that, like, some players in modern football, their job is to be a sweeper and on the ball, and so it's kind of easier in some respects to look great because you're the pass before the pass that makes the goal, or you're the one who like steps in and intervenes, whereas for Chrissy McCaig to stand out, it's much harder. For the man markers to stand out, it's much harder.
Oh, big time, yeah.
And in a way, I don't know, like, maybe we need best man marker, you know, and you pick 3 of them, and you're like best sweeper and you pick one. I don't know how to answer, but making it realistic is like,
yeah, well, I think they have to be picking a team like you would want it to go out and play. Yeah. And I'd be more than happy to have the 2 lads inside and Barry Nash sweeping essentially as he does.
Okay, really weak full back or half back line here. Diarmaid Byrnes, Declan Hannon and Pádraig Mannion are your 3. Yeah, this is going to be it, isn't it? This is what you think the All-Star is going to be?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. You wouldn't like to be trying to penetrate that half-back line as a half-forward line now, which you're trying to think how you're going to break him down. Burns was on another planet this year, boys. Like, just ridiculous what he was doing. There's never been a half-back that does what he can do, that can hurt you from 110 yards. Like, in the first half of the All-Ireland final this year, Owen Murphy put a puck out down. Burns puts the claw up and puts it back over the bar. Like, you know, Kilkenny are gone from being on the attack to, you know,
it's negative.
Yeah, basically, yeah, and so quickly, and it's such a crisp striker of the ball as well. Like, when you're playing Limerick now, you're trying to think, how are we going to stop Diarmaid Byrnes hitting us for 3 or 4 points from wing back? And Tipperary actually did it really well this year. They almost shoveled a lot of bodies to his wing so that he never got a clean strike away, and they managed to keep him off the ball. But and his free taking ability, they just trust him from anywhere inside 120 yards, I'd say.
And it's not just the freeze that's going to make him Hurler of the Year if he is Hurler of the Year. It's the all-round game.
Oh yeah, big time. I was chatting to Cyril Farrell about him last night because I'm just doing a piece for the paper on Saturday, and he just said the one thing in college with me also, he was always so mad to attack the ball, and halfbacks a lot of the time now, you see it at club level a lot of the time, their first duty is to stop the ball, just stop it going through, and he does that brilliantly. But not only does he stop it or break it down, he usually brings it on with him as well. So he's gone from his main defensive duties to stop it, perfect, but then he brings it forward and sets up an attack, and his ball inside to the forward line is class. And his work alongside Hannon, like, those 2 guys are just like 2 peas in a pod there, and link so unbelievably well.
I was reading John Fogarty last night from earlier in the year, where he was picking his July All-Stars at that particular juncture, and he had Byrnes, Hannon, and then Paddy Deegan of Kilkenny at left wing back. Like, he had a great year as well, but it's hard to argue with the final three. You see some of the names on that list that don't make the half-back line, you're like, Jesus, this is strength and depth there. Like,
yeah, Paddy Deegan probably suffered from the fact that he had to mark Gerard Hegarty in the All-Ireland final, realistically. But Pádraig Mannion, to me, this year was back to his form of 17 and 18 when he was really in his pomp, and particularly when they were struggling, even in the Leinster final against Kilkenny, when there was a sinking ship in the last 20 minutes, he was still the one leading the fight, and same against Limerick this year. Do the finals and semi-finals, like we were talking yesterday, do they count for double in your mind? Like Tom O'Sullivan, very unlucky to miss out in the Football All-Stars.
Well, positive and negative, right?
Well, but Mark and Shane Walsh in the final, probably similar to Deegan, probably did him out of an All-Star potentially. Yeah,
actually, you don't yourself. Most of the stock is placed on the semi-final and final, realistically, and that's why we move to someone like Tony Kelly in a minute. That's why there's the potential for him to be left out, because he's such a quiet semi-final. But like, you can't forget what happened in Munster before that, when he was probably on another planet to any other player in the province, realistically. But there is an awful lot of stock placed on it.
Yeah, I do feel for the defender who is on a team that is so good and has been brilliant all the year, and then is trusted in the final to go up against the best hurler in the country, you know, putting in an all-time great performance, and you're like, oh, you can't be an All-Star because you were. But I tried. Like, I was good enough to be considered for that role, you know.
Yeah, no, I get you. Yeah, it's not simple. Yeah.
Anybody else who is close to getting into that half-back line or full-back line?
Diarmaid Ryan from Clare would have been close in my view anyway. Again, another player who, when Kilkenny were battering him in that semi-final, he was standing up. I think he had a couple of points for play that day. He was good in the Munster final as well. See, it's funny, it depends, and we're talking there about what duties you get. Depends on what duties you get in a given day sometime. Like Diarmaid Ryan, you could maybe say had a quiet enough Munster final, but he was duelling with Tom Morrissey at times. He was duelling with Gerard Hegarty at times. If you're not touching the ball, it's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as they're not touching. Like Gerard Hegarty had a quiet Munster final. I think he was on McInerney for most of it. Tom Morrissey was good in the Munster final, but they had a good battle. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you're not going to get that 8 or 9 out of 10 performance.
Yeah, and look, for when it comes to the midfield, I think that the whole point is, like, what is the role of the midfielder? So the nominees for midfield: David Fitzgerald of Clare, Ryan Taylor of Clare, Tom Monaghan of Galway, Darragh Fitzgibbon of Cork, William O'Donoghue of Limerick, and Adrian Mullen of Kilkenny. Mullen's in your team and Joseph Cooney's in your team.
Yeah, I've gone a bit rogue there.
You're going to get in trouble here now.
Yeah, not nominated in midfield, but
well, the thing is, right, he played half back at times, he played midfield at times, and he played half forward at times. Midfield is not that definite. Like, to be honest, Adrian Mullen didn't play midfield a lot of time for Kilkenny either. He played half forward. He was an outlet at middle of the field when they were breaking out of defence, but he wasn't playing midfield a lot of times. So to me, midfield is fluid enough. This is the one where I've probably gone for personal preference here rather than what I actually think it will be. I think more than likely David Fitzgerald will get picked midfield alongside Adrian Mullen, which I just thought Joseph Cooney had an unbelievable year. Getting on the scoreboard a lot, and he's a real utility player as well. When Gerard McInerney went off in the All-Ireland quarter-final, he went back centre-back and just slotted in seamlessly. I thought he had a brilliant year. He's very good against Limerick as well, but he's unlikely to get it.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? So if you do really well, and you're like a Jenga piece or a Swiss Army knife that they move around, then you get punished when it comes to the selection for this. And that's also not fair. Like, I don't know, is there a way around this where, you know, there's a mark given properly that takes into account possessions, blocks, hooks, you know, how often you were free on the ball, as opposed to, like, have this gut instinct, he showed up on the highlights.
I know what you mean.
Trying to add a bit of science to this, but it's impossible.
And it's adding science to what's such a subjective exercise, really. And it does come down to personal preference and personal opinion.
Take the fun out of it. Too much science, you take the fun out of it. You need a bit of artistic, poetic license and kind of pick your own people, like, you know.
I put together a piece last year on the goalkeeping position and got a lot of really interesting stats to show who should have been the All-Star goalkeeper. And I thought it was, and I've brilliant time for Owen Murphy. I think he's probably the best keeper of his generation. But, you know, a lot of the stats pointed in Nicky Quaid's favour, particularly with what he was doing when he had the ball in his hand, and he didn't get the All-Star. So
yeah, well, so Cooney could get out of the reckoning because he was man of the match at centre back. Maybe not have been man of the match, but it was sensational there. But it's like, well, he didn't do his best stuff at centre back, and we can't put him in centre back. Can't put him in midfield because he was, you know, like.
But if Colin Kavanagh can get picked in the football at full back a number of years ago, then why can't they? I mean, they can switch it around.
I think when that happened, I think there's license to put anybody anywhere. Really, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you think it's going to be David Fitzgerald and Adrian Mullen? Adrian Mullen close enough to a shoe-in?
Oh, he's an absolute shoe-in, yeah. Probably had a quiet All-Ireland final by his standards, but before that, he must have had the guts of about 20 points from playing this year's championship.
There was pressure on him. Like, I definitely remember pre tournament, we were talking, I think it was with Paul Murphy, and it was like, been a lot of talk about Adrian Mullen. He's been injured for a while. This is it now. He needs to stand up and be one of the leaders of the team. And then, like, 3-4 points from play every game, showing for ball, and actually really stood up to it.
Yeah, and like he's probably the one player that's going to lead Ballyhale, I'd say, forward for the next 10 years as well. I was chatting Jackie Tyrrell about this, and he was kind of saying, when you look at the Ballyhale journey, he said it started with Henry, would say the relatively recent generation has passed on to TJ, and he thinks it's passed on to Adrian Mullen now. And you're talking about pressure being on him. Like, he's no more than 23, I'd say.
Yeah.
Like, it's mad, like, really.
Can I go to bat for Will O'Donoghue here? Like, Na Piarsaigh in Limerick, people are going to be getting in touch. Like, he's unbelievable. The John O'Shea potentially of this All-Star selection, like, fairly underrated. Probably should get one, but will he?
I think you've even done him a disservice there. Patrick Vieira is what I'd nearly associate more with. And this is another thing. I think Will O'Donoghue's the best midfielder in the country.
Right.
But I don't necessarily think he was the best midfielder. I think he's head and shoulders above the rest of the midfielders in the country, if I'm honest. But again, he does a lot of the less glamorous work, shall we say. He does a lot of the spoiling.
Yeah. We need a science to take that into account.
Now I think he did the same last year, but was probably more effective, if you get me. But I take your point, Shane. If they're looking at picking definitely an out-and-out midfielder who definitely played midfield all year, there's a possibility that he could slip in there, definitely. And like, I've went to bat for him more than anybody. Like, he was absolutely robbed in 2020 of an All-Star. So he definitely should have 2 to 3 under his belt already. That wouldn't be a massive departure if they picked him. But on this year's form, I'm not sure.
Do you think the All-Star committee picks based on that? Like, even Thomas Sullivan has 2 already, so they're thinking, maybe we'll give someone else one. And will I mean, you know, could they give one to him this year, given that he did miss out, as you say, in years where he probably could have got one? Do you think that comes into the reckoning at all? Like, or is it solely based on the year? We never know. We don't know the behind the scenes how these things are picked. But
I've talked to some people who've been in the room.
Of course, yeah.
Apparently, it's less fractious than it used to be because they can't smoke anymore. And I'm not sure they can drink anymore.
No, they can't. No, they can't.
Back in the day, apparently, it was they would have lasted a long time.
Yeah, but we're all, Shane, on that point, we're all like human. Like, it's the same as referees. Like, you know, it's very easy to, you know, think of that. Oh, he missed out. Maybe we were wrong a couple of years ago. You know, that's the way life works. Like,
my biggest thing for all this is I thought Aidan O'Mahony should have been in the conversation for man of the match in the All Ireland final when he marked Michael Murphy out.
Oh yeah.
Didn't get a mention, didn't get an All-Star that year, and I'm like, that's the hardest job. Murphy at that stage was the best footballer in the country, had not the impact in the All-Ireland final that he should have had, because somebody does one job better than anybody else is able to do it. That for me is an All-Star, and it's your point about like that unseen stuff, and that's where there's no science to this. But if your job is to find space and you're actually the extra forward who plays as a third midfielder, and you're scoring 3 or 4 points, maybe you should be scoring 7 points. Do you know? You have 12 chances and you score 4 points, and everyone's like, but we forget the wides, really.
Yeah. But I'm going to always bat, like, as a cornerback down through my years, like, unless someone watches a game close to you, never get any credit. So I'd always bat for the lads who do the less glamorous jobs, and would say the likes of an O'Donoghue or an Aidan O'Mahony. That's the reason Kerry probably won the All-Ireland, lads, in 2014, realistically, like. And unless you're looking closely at it and you see how he's spoiling, how he's tracking every run, you're not going to take into account just how good he was on that given day. That sort of thing annoys me, I have to say.
The half-forward line, you've got Garrod Hegarty, Kyle Hayes and Shane O'Donnell. I think maybe people are sleeping a little bit on how good Shane O'Donnell was this year as well.
O'Donnell was brilliant, particularly coming back from his concussion issues and wondering whether he'd ever get back playing club hurling, let alone county hurling. Again, when they were struggling, like, he was brilliant when they were going well, and that's fine, but I'd always look at a guy when their team isn't going particularly well. They were struggling against Wexford in that quarter final. He came up with 3 to 4 points at the end of that game. You know, they were being tanked by Kilkenny in the All-Ireland semi-final, and he was still the one that was taking it to them. I think he's an absolute shoe-in, I have to say. And obviously Hegarty scored 1-5 in the All-Ireland final, was in the reckoning before that, has scored 3-14 from playing his last 3 All-Ireland final appearances, has saved the best to last. That All-Ireland final display this year I'd put up against any display in an All-Ireland final, just from second one to the last second, it was near perfection. And then you're looking at Kyle Hayes, Kyle Hayes is the best wing back in the country at 7. Diarmaid Byrnes offers one thing, Hayes offers a completely different thing. He's a marauding wing back, but he went up centre forward, and just like in 2018 when he got Young Hurler of the Year, he was one of the big differences. I think he had 4 points in the All-Ireland final as well.
Is there anybody close?
Tom Morrissey's always close in that sector. Again, another guy who probably has not been talked about this year as much because he wasn't on the scoreboard maybe as much as he had been. He's definitely close and in the reckoning there. But Shane O'Donnell is probably the one that some people would question, but to me, I think he's a lock, I have to say.
Okay. The full forward line is Tony Kelly. You've gone for TJ Reid and Aaron Gillan. So TJ's a nominee for Hurler of the Year, so he's definitely going to be an All-Star.
Yeah, definitely. And Gillan was in the conversation coming into the All-Ireland final before. He was, quiet by his standards, but still ended up with 3 points. And just because people would say Tony Kelly didn't play corner forward, well, he played corner forward or full forward in some games, but again, very few teams play 3 inside now, so he's coming out. Yeah. He's coming out to the half line, he's coming out to midfield, and people would say maybe TJ didn't play inside. He played inside enough. He played corner forward in the All-Ireland final for large stages, and Gillan was nearly always inside. Gillan's just so dangerous in the air. It's funny, I was chatting to Kieran Carey about this recently. He said that Aaron Gillan wasn't actually that good in the air until he really went after that. He was obviously good at ball on the ground, and they really went after it after training with the well, with Patrick Swell, and he just got it really quickly, and now he's probably one of the best in the air, and he just drifts in behind, and if you let him drift in behind and he catches it, it's probably a goal straight away. Okay,
who's close in that full forward line then that might get in ahead of, well, is it Tony Kelly who's at danger here?
Tony Kelly is probably the one most at risk, I would say. Conor Whelan from Galway wouldn't be a million miles away, just probably because they were beaten in Leinster and didn't make it to the All-Ireland final. He's probably going to be overlooked, but he had some great tallies. Particularly, he was very good in that Leinster final when nobody else was playing well, until Hugh Lawler literally knew, all I need to do is shut this man down somewhat and nobody else is going to contribute, because that's what happened on the day, and Kilkenny won the game. He won't be far away. Desi Hutchinson won't be one that anyone's really going to be talking about, but Waterford had a terrible championship and he'd a brilliant championship. He scored 5 from playoff Sean Finn when they played. I think he got 6 points in their last game against Clare when nobody else performed. They probably won't be talked about, but they definitely deserve to be in the conversation.
Hurler of the Year's Diarmaid Byrnes for you. The nominees TJ Reid, Diarmaid Byrnes, Barry Nash.
Yeah, I think Byrnes hit 36 points over the course of the summer, and I remember down in Limerick it was literally Byrnes scoring one end, down in Clare I should say, Byrnes scoring one end, Kelly scoring the other end. It was just a game, basically a game on the scoreboard between a wing back and the best forward in the country.
Yeah.
And he had a really solid All-Ireland final, and I think he's. I'd be very surprised if it was anybody else.
The Young Hurler of the Year, Mikey Butler, Owen Cody and Kieran Joyce are the nominees. So you would expect, because they reached the Ireland final, that it's going to be between Butler and Cody, is it? Yeah,
Cody would do something that I don't think anybody else has done. He'd be Young Hurler of the Year 3 years in a row if he does win it. They changed it. They changed it to under 22 this year because probably the amount of candidates, it's under 22, because the amount of candidates maybe at that age weren't particularly big up until this year, and then this year we had plenty of candidates. It's just the way it works, because maybe lads are making an impact in Inter-County at a bit of an older age now. But my worry is, and I know Will O'Callaghan's probably looking, I'd be worried that there's going to be this Montreal screw job here where Mikey Butler doesn't get corner back but he gets Young Hurler of the Year as compensation. Now that's not to say the Young Hurler of the Year is voted on by players, but to me he's the obvious candidate, and I just hope
he gets both.
Yeah, but it's not like, it's not, Mikey Butler's young lad, you'll get one next year. We don't know that.
No.
2022 to me is the best cornerback, so he deserves to be an All-Star, and I think he deserves to be Young Hurler of the Year.
You could get injured, you can miss for who knows, you could go travelling.
Colin McCarthy on YouTube. Tony Kelly hasn't performed at the business end of the year again in this year. No impact on the quarter or the semi-final.
Well, I think he had 3 or 4. I think he had 4 from play in the quarter final.
So that's not bad.
Yeah, he was quiet by his standards, but there was generally a hangover over the whole Clare team after that Munster final. There's another thing as well, lads, is that when a team really throws it down to Limerick, they seem to have an inability to back it up. Because whatever effort it takes, if you look at Kilkenny in 2019 when they beat them, the last championship defeat they've had, they couldn't back it up in the All-Ireland final. Look at Clare in the Munster final this year, couldn't back it up somewhat against Wexford, very poor against Kilkenny. You look at there's a couple of more teams even that have thrown it down to them, and whatever it is, the toll it takes, they can't back it up.
It makes sense, that's why they're the greatest team potentially of all time. They're on track for it anyway.
They're getting there, yeah.
Michael, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us. We'll find out on Friday evening exactly how those two teams match up.